Let me see. It's funny, I always carry it with me. It must be here somewhere. What? My tape measure. What do you want it for? I want to see how you two measure up. Here it is. Good. Come along then. Quickly. Head up, Michael. Don't slouch. Just as I thought. Extremely stubborn and suspicious. See for yourself. Extremely stubborn and suspicious. Now you, James. Rather inclined to giggle, doesn't put things away. How about you? Very well, hold this for me. As I expected, Mary Poppins practically perfect in every way.
Mary Poppins, is that your name? It's lovely.
Thank you. I've always liked it. Now,
wouldn't that be great to have a tape measure that told you the truth about people, that revealed who they truly were? You could just simply walk up, measure them, and then read about their character, about their nature. It'd save a lot of problems, wouldn't it, in relationships? Let's see. Unwilling to commit. How about this one? At first seems very affectionate and loving, but will in fact be abusive. This is definitely one I want to avoid. Well, how about business dealings? Here's somebody, business dealing, let's see. Oh, dishonest and shifty. Not the type of person I want to deal with. This person over here, let's see. Usually doesn't pay full price. Okay, that's maybe not something I want to make. In all of our relationships, a tape measure like that really revealed who we were, or who a person was, their character, their nature, would be very helpful, wouldn't it? Unfortunately, I don't know too many people who have tape measures like that. We are left to go with our own sort of inclinations, our own perceptions, our own sort of ideas about a person. And I think, sadly and unfortunately, we jump to those conclusions oftentimes by what we first see in someone. We look at them and we make a judgment about them before they even open their mouths. And that judgment stands come what may. That judgment stands, unfortunately. James warns us about this very thing. James warns us not to do this very thing. He declares a problem in the Christian church. He says that Christians are showing prejudice and playing favorites, showing favoritism among believers. And he says this should not be. Listen to the opening verse again. As Dan read it for us, James 2:1 says, "My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism." Favoritism. James, in this passage, this opening part of chapter 2, uses some very unique and creative language, very descriptive language. This word here for favoritism doesn't appear anywhere in the ancient Greek manuscripts. In any ancient Greek writing, this is the first time this word appears. James may be the inventor of a new word here. You are getting to witness the birth of a word. This word favoritism. What James has done is he's taken two words and put them together. He's taken the word for face and he's put it together with the word for to take, a verb to take. So what he's saying is, don't take people's faces. What he means by that is, don't take them at face value. Don't judge them by how they appear. Don't be taken in by appearances. Don't be face takers. We might say today, don't judge a book. Right. So James goes on in verses 2 to 4 to give a hypothetical situation in which this face-taking, what this face-taking might look like back in his day. He says, James 2, I pick up, suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, here, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, stand over there, or sit here on the floor by me. Have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Again, James uses very descriptive language here. He could just say, a rich man and a poor man walk into your church. Sounds kind of like a bad start to a real bad joke. All right? But he says, a rich man, and he goes very descriptively, he says a rich man with gold rings on his fingers. A lot of bling, we might say. He's got bling all over his hands. Bling, bling. And he says this gold-ringed man is wearing fine clothes. Now the description of the clothing is not like just like designer jeans and that sort of thing. It's like very bright white clothing. It's the same sort of language that elsewhere in the Bible is used to describe angels. So you can picture it this way. If it was in a sitcom, the rich man would walk through the doors and a hush would fall over the congregation as every eye turned to see and just gaped, staring admiringly at this man with gold rings all over his fingers. And a backlight would come up. He would be backlit with a spotlight from behind, and his white clothing would appear as though there was a halo, an aura around him. And then suddenly, the choir, unable to restrain themselves, would stand up and start saying, very descriptive of James. But he also then goes on to describe the poor man in quite as graphic a description. Now, the poor man walks through the door and he's in shabby clothes. Not just shabby clothes, but the people, again, the same sort of response, initial response is the same sort of thing. A hush falls over the congregation, and every eye turns to see the poor man who has just walked through the door. But instead of staring admiringly, there are gasps of terror. The people here in the front area hold their nose and try to fan away the smell of urine and feces on him and infection. And his breath smells like he hasn't brushed his teeth in weeks because he hasn't. It smells like he needs some dental work because there's infection in those teeth that are rotting out of his mouth. His clothes are dirty, and the stains of dirt on his face seem as though they may be permanent marks rather than temporary and washable. And people gasp in horror. As he walks across the sanctuary floor, you can hear the soles of his shoes flapping against the bottom of his feet because they're falling apart, and his clothes are in tatters and covered in smudge and dirt and stink. And people are looking for excuses. You know, when the rich man came in, everybody wanted to come up and greet him and talk to him and introduce themselves and find out who is this person. When the poor man comes in, they all want to go the other way and find excuses to go talk to their friends in the far corner of the room or downstairs or out the back in the swing set. They never volunteer to watch the kids swinging on the swing sets, but today is their day for watching the kids on the swing set or going down to the nursery because they're doing their best to get away from the poor man who walks through the door, this rancid dude who's come in to our midst. James uses this very, very descriptive language, and it's exaggerated and hyperbole to get attention of the people, to create this fictitious event, this scenario about what's really happening in the church. It's an exaggeration, but it's really what is essentially happening. And he's saying that this is probably the normal response in our churches. A poor man comes in and we ignore him. A rich man comes in and we pay attention. A poor man comes in and we find an excuse not to talk to him. A rich man comes in and we look for an excuse to talk to him. James says, we're playing favorites. We're picking and choosing who to love, picking and choosing who to welcome. And he says, this face-taking, this taking at face value, this appraising people by the way that they look, it's favoritism. It's prejudice. And he goes on to define exactly what prejudice is. Prejudice, in its simplest definition, is simply prejudging someone. It's judging someone with a look and without good cause. It's judging based on outward appearances rather than inward character exhibited by actions. And James says that Christians are not to prejudge other Christians. We are not to judge one another based on outward appearances. Or, James warns, we become judges with evil motives and evil thoughts. This does not, however, mean that we should not judge at all. And that may surprise you. But Christians are actually called to discriminate between God-honoring actions and actions that dishonor God. We are called to judge people's actions. We are called to judge between those things which do bring God glory and those things that disappoint Him. We are called to discern the differences between people who believe and are living out their faith and people who maybe claim to have faith but are not living it out or don't claim at all to have faith. The Bible also warns us, do not be unevenly yoked, right? How can you choose whether or not to be yoked with somebody unless you use some judgment? We are called to judge. We are not called to be judgmental. The most quoted verse in the Bible these days is no longer John 3:16, but it's Matthew 7:1. Matthew 7:1 says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." And it's the King James Version that gets mostly quoted. I guess there's some sort of official, if you remember the ye's and the lests, it makes it more official. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Therefore, it must be true, because I said ye and lest. Right? But they stop there. They'd say, oh, I've just given you an airtight argument that nobody should ever judge the actions of anybody else, and you shouldn't judge what I'm doing. You shouldn't tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, because you judge not, lest you be judged. But they always stop there at 7:1. They don't finish out what Jesus was saying. They stop in the middle of Jesus' declaration. They stop mid-sentence. Listen to the rest of it. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. And the measure that you use will be measured for you. Why do you look at this speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the plank in your brother, the speck in your brother's eyes. It doesn't say, don't remove the speck in your brother's eyes. It says, remove the plank first. So that what? You can see clearly. To do what? Help your brother remove the speck. We are to judge, but we are not to be judgmental. We aren't supposed to say, hey, you got a speck in your eye, you lowlife, you dirty scoundrel. Hey, you got a speck in your eye, dork. You get a look at that guy with a speck in his eye, right? We're called to acknowledge our own sin. Why? Because only in acknowledging that, in humility, can we then help others to acknowledge theirs. We're not supposed to go around and say, hey, you got sin, and I'm up here. I'm the judge of you, right? We're supposed to say, hey, look, I got sin, and you got sin. This is the sin that I deal with. This is the sin that I wrestle with. I know what it's like to wrestle with sin. And you're wrestling with sin now. This is sin. I know you're not acknowledging it, but it is. It's sin. We're supposed to help each other. That's the purpose of judging. To encourage each other. To challenge each other. To hold each other accountable. You can't hold someone accountable if you're not willing to say something is wrong. If you're not willing to call a spade. But you're not supposed to then take the next step, climb up on a ladder, and say, hey, you did that bad thing. Look at me up here, how much better I am than you. We are called to judge others. We are not called to be judgmental over them. We are not called to be arrogant and above them. We are called to judge them so that we can help them in their attempts to obey God's word. Prejudging other believers. Prejudging, judging them on appearances, James says, is wrong. using